Us, Mike Davis, thank you so much for taking some time for us.
Yeah, I've carefully read the indictment, and it confirms what I've suspected since August, and that this is a political hit on former President Trump, who is the leading presidential candidate against Garland's boss, Joe Biden. And the reason this is a political hit is because it doesn't even cite the Presidential Records Act, which is the controlling statute for a former president's handling of his presidential records. In the office of the former president, which is congressionally funded, very secure, with Secret Service protection, staff with security clearances, they don't even cite the Presidential Records Act. And they are trying to push this legal theory that a former president having his presidential records, just retaining them, not even using them to harm America, just retaining them is an Espionage Act violation. That is not going to that is not going to be upheld. That legal theory will not be upheld by the Supreme Court of the United States. And Jack Smith is used to getting reversed unanimously by the Supreme Court of the United States by bringing bogus political theories to take out Republican presidential candidates, like he did with Bob McDonnell, a potential Republican presidential candidate in 2016.
Mike, thank you for that. I want to toss to Arlene. So you mentioned the audio recordings, and some are calling this a speaking indictment. What does that mean?
So he actually transcribed the audio recording within the indictment. He gives line by line what was said in the audio recording in the indictment. And so this gives people a more clear understanding of what was said and how it actually is used to counter what he said, that he declassified all of the documents, right? So in the audio recording, he actually admits, if this is actually a valid and authentic audio recording, it validates that he actually knew the document was classified, and that he admits that he did not declassify it, and actually showed it to some people who didn't have security clearance. That's what it's showing.
And on that note, these recordings took place, if they're true, right? They took place in New Jersey, but this case right now is being tried in Miami. So how does that work?
Well, it's contained in the indictment, but most likely he won't be able to bring it into the case in Florida. Now, you have to remember that everything that's in this indictment has to go through another process and be approved to be brought into the case in Florida. And the case in Florida is only going to cover the things that actually happened in Florida. It's called venue, right? You have to bring the case into the correct venue. So yes, he's provided all this information in the indictment. It's good theater for news media to report on it, and for people to know about it. And actually it kind of hurts Trump because it influences people's thinking, right? Even though it may not be brought into the Florida court, people have already heard about it, they've already read about it, they already know about it. So, it has that kind of an impact.
Let's go to Mike if we could. Mike, let's get your reaction, and if you could also comment on the audio tapes and what your thoughts are, how damning those could be.
If you look at what Jack Smith alleges in this indictment, he misses words from what Trump said in that transcribed tape recording that they have later on in the indictment. He didn't say that they were classified. He said that they were secret, that these were secret documents. And it doesn't matter under the Presidential Records Act whether they're classified or not, national security documents or not. The former president is allowed to access his presidential records, and that's why Congress gives the former president the office of the former president. And it is generally legally impossible to obstruct investigations into non-crimes. There is a binding 2019 Office of Legal Counsel, OLC, legal opinion at the Justice Department that Merrick Garland and Jack Smith ignored. They ignored the Presidential Records Act. They ignored a 2012 Obama judge ruling with Clinton's highly classified audio recordings of his presidency in his sock drawer, and they're ignoring the 2019 OLC opinion. Regardless of what the facts are in this indictment, this is legally deficient on its face. They're not even alleging that President Trump intended to harm the United States by simply retaining his presidential records.
Mike, it's Kelly right here, and I wanted to ask you, you alluded to or referred to former governor of Virginia, Bob McDonnell, and how that case was unanimously reversed in the Supreme Court. We're going to be having, as a program note, the governor on with us today to talk about this case related to the federal indictment of the former President of the United States, Donald Trump. But I want to ask you a question specifically about Attorney General Bill Barr. As you know, he was Donald Trump's Attorney General. And he told my former colleague Shannon Bream on Fox News Sunday that Donald Trump is toast if even half of this material in today's indictment, which is 37 counts, is true. Also, he stated the indictment is very, very damning. How do you square that with your assertion about what's going on, and how do you compare that to the former Attorney General of the United States?
Bill Barr is sour grapes. He's being very reckless by saying that a criminal defendant is toast based upon an allegations in a complaint. There are legal deficiencies in this complaint that I just outlined. The Presidential Records Act controls the former president's handling of his presidential records, not the Espionage Act. Even if the Espionage Act does control, they're not showing how President Trump intended to harm the United States by simply retaining his presidential records. Third point, Bill Barr should know this 2019 Office of Legal Counsel legal opinion that you generally can't obstruct investigations into non-crimes because he's the Attorney General who signed the OLC opinion.
And the burden of proof, of course, is with Jack Smith and how he proceeds with this case. But as you look at other people commenting on this case, particular Chris Christie, the former governor of New Jersey, who, as you know, is running as a political candidate, a presidential candidate, he stated that much of this, and even Paul Ryan, the former Speaker of the House, much of today's problems for the former President of the United States, Donald Trump, is by his own doing, that he could have complied and responded to the subpoena as well as complied with the National Archives in following that, and that the material that he now possesses in those documents, top secret and classified, are not of his own personal property but belong to the United States government. Is this something that Donald Trump could have avoided by just cooperating in the past?
So under the Presidential Records Act, it is very clear that the statute is very clear that former presidents get access to their presidential records. He's allowed to have his presidential records under the Presidential Records Act. And we have a lot of Democrats and Republicans who are tired of Trump using this as a way to try to take him out as a presidential candidate. They are ignoring the law to try to take out President Trump.
Thank you, Mike.
Back to Arlene in the studio here. Arlene, if we could just get your thoughts on how former President Trump has been reacting, specifically when it comes to speaking to the world via his platform, Truth Social.
Well, as you know, Steve, he has consistently said that this is a hoax and that they're out to get him. He talks about how this is election interference, and he is determined to continue on with the election. He's going to continue to run for president no matter what. He believes that he's an innocent man, that this should never have happened. He said that it's been 7 years that they've been coming after him. He compares this to the Russia collusion investigation, where he says that turned out to be nothing, and he feels like this is going to turn out to be the same thing.
And Trump's co-defendant, his valet, Walt Nauta, if you could give us a little bit of background on him, what is his role?
So Walt was his aide. He's a former Navy officer, and he was supposedly or allegedly helping Trump to move documents around. And so what they're saying is that he was conspiring with Trump to conceal some of these classified documents that they had requested, but that Trump didn't want to give to them.
Mike Davis, back to you. When it comes to the valet, Walt Nauta, what are your thoughts on the DOJ targeting him? Is he going to, fold in their eyes? Is he an easy target? What are your thoughts?
I don't know what the DOJ's intent is. I know that Jack Smith is used to getting reversed unanimously by the Supreme Court, and I want to read the relevant part of the Presidential Records Act. The presidential records of a former president shall be available to such former president or the former president's designated representative. The former president gets to have his presidential records. He can have designated representatives who have the presidential records. There is no criminal component to the Presidential Records Act. This was a political hit to get President Trump. And what the archives should have done, which is what they do with all former presidents in the past, is you file a civil lawsuit. You negotiate, you file a civil lawsuit. You don't do unlawful home raids You don't do unprecedented indictments of a former president because you thought he was being a jerk with his presidential records.
So, Mike, I've got to ask you, you followed politics for a very long time. You worked with Senator Chuck Grassley of Iowa. You've been following not only this case, but other cases in the past, and you know that there are other cases are pending as we're watching video right now outside of the Miami courthouse. I just need to ask you, what do you think this is doing to the fabric of America in terms of the great divide that we have right now?
The Democrats have crossed the Rubicon. They had Alvin Bragg, Matthew Colangelo got sent from the Biden Justice Department to help Alvin Bragg resuscitate a dead zombie case based upon a bogus legal theory passed on by the Manhattan U.S. Attorney, the Federal Election Commission, Alvin Bragg himself. They resuscitated a zombie case to get Trump there. They're going after Trump with this bogus legal theory about a former president having his presidential records in the office of former president, which is allowed under the Presidential Records Act. Then they're going to go after Trump down in Georgia with Fani Willis under the bogus legal theory that a president objecting to the presidential election, which is allowed by the Electoral Count Act of 1887, is somehow illegal. This is all lawfare to take out President Trump because they fear they cannot beat him in the election in November of 2024.
And you know, of course, people will disagree with that on the other side. You say it's just Democrats, but what about fellow Republicans like the former Speaker of the House, Paul Ryan, who says that Donald Trump is waging a vindictive campaign and could hurt the Republican Party in terms of its goals of achieving any majority within the House and the Senate?
Well, and that's the problem, is that they see Trump as a political problem, so they want to take him out legally. You just made my points. And I guess I would say this to these Democrats and these Trump deranged rhinos: what's their remedy here? Do you want President Trump to die in prison because he got into a dispute with librarians and other bureaucrats over his presidential records? Is that the remedy? There's no evidence that President Trump used these presidential records to secure bribery or foreign corruption or sell out America like there is evidence that Joe Biden and Hillary Clinton did. But we're going to put President Trump in prison for the rest of his life. You want him to die in prison because you think he's a jerk and you don't like him politically.
Mike, what is the hope for America that you have?
I mean, I think the hope for America is that the jury down in Miami is going to exonerate him, which they should do. Judge Cannon should throw out this indictment on the legal sufficiency alone. And if it can't get resolved, the American people need to put President Trump back in the White House in November 2024. He can dismiss these charges with prejudice or pardon himself, and we can move on.
I want to turn to Arlene in studio here. We've mentioned the New York case and now the current one in Miami. What about other legal woes that Trump is facing, and how might that play out as 2024 unfolds?
Well, as you know, we've talked about the Alvin Bragg indictment already. That case currently is in federal court. Trump's attorneys are trying to move that case to federal court because they believe that Alvin Bragg can't litigate a federal charge, which is one of the charges they believe is under the federal election law. So they're attempting to get that moved. There will be a hearing on that scheduled for June 27. If it doesn't get moved to the federal court, then there will be a trial date in March of 2024. Fulton County, the DA in Fulton County, Fani Willis, is currently conducting an investigation into these alleged efforts to change the 2020 election results. She has given a signal that she is intending to possibly indict in August. She has asked the local courts to clear their calendars in August. She has asked for increased security in August, and she is planning to have her staff work remotely in August. So the speculation is that she will likely announce an indictment in August. She has recently started to expand her probe into other states. She's looking at some of Donald Trump's activities, specifically 2 firms that he hired to find election fraud in 2020. And then we have the January 6th investigation, which is ongoing. Jack Smith is also conducting that investigation into whether or not Donald Trump incited the Capitol breach on January 6th and whether he attempted to overturn the election. So he has subpoenaed several people, some of the same people that he has subpoenaed in this case, from the White House, former administration officials, including Mike Pence and also Steve Bannon most recently. And it is expected that there will be another indictment in that case. In terms of the election, the first debate is scheduled for August 23rd. So that's going to overlap with the Georgia indictment that's expected to come out. And then after that, the Republican Party is planning to have one debate a month until the end of the year. And then starting in January, they're expected to have 2 debates a month. So we're not sure if Trump is going to get involved in the debate in August. Some people say that he would be better off not getting involved right away. But come next year, as we get into March, there will be that trial in the Alvin Bragg indictment case, and that will overlap with the debates. And then at the same time, from January to June, there also will be a lot of primaries and caucuses held during that time. So this will really interfere with his ability to debate, I guess, and also to campaign for himself.
Charlene, what you're stating goes to the core of what Mike was just talking about as well. These legal ramifications and the wranglings that Donald Trump will have to face as a front-runner presidential candidate who is likely expected, based on the linear projections and the polls right now, expected to win and become the presumptive presidential nominee for the Republican Party. Legally, can he still be able to afford the expense of going to all these trials and still being on the campaign trail? I mean, America has never seen this before. Let's be honest. This is unprecedented. It's uncharted waters. We said this back in April with New York, and now it's federal. Here's the former commander-in-chief who was in charge of military, the Department of Defense, and now he's indicted by the federal government that he was sworn to protect and to serve for his alleged actions and misdeeds as a person of interest and a personal citizen.
Yeah, legally, I'm not sure where he's getting the money from. He does have a lot of businesses that he owns, so of course, those businesses continue. He continues to make money from those businesses. In terms of his campaign and the funding that he gets for that, I don't think that can be used for his legal woes.
Is anyone above the law?
Well, maybe President Biden is. I'm not sure. Kelly?
We will see.
Mike Davis, we'll go back to you remotely if we could. Mike, I want to get your thoughts. You touched upon this in your last segment. Basically, that this is all process crimes. There's, it's very hard to see the underlying crime. If you could sort of unpack that idea and explain to the audience, parse between those two.
Yeah, it is not a crime for a former president to have his presidential records in the office of the former president. That is specifically allowed by the Presidential Records Act. The Biden Justice Department is ignoring the Presidential Records Act and charging Trump under the Espionage Act, which is not applicable to a former president's handling of his presidential records. The Espionage Act would be applicable to a former president's handling of other classified records, but just not his presidential records. They're ignoring that, and they're trying to charge him with espionage, even though there is zero evidence that Trump intended to harm the United States. And then they do what prosecutors do when they have a weak case. They charge 30 counts, and then they charge obstruction of justice, and that's exactly what Jack Smith is doing here. If you look at the allegations in the complaint, you see all these bad facts in the complaint, that Trump was moving documents, and he did this and he did that. Look at the legal allegations. The legal allegations do not hold up on this in this complaint. They will not hold up hopefully with Judge Cannon. She'll kick this complaint, but I hope that the 11th Circuit Court of Appeals or the Supreme Court has to gets this resolved. In the meantime, the American people need to put President Trump back in the Oval Office in January of 2025.